On a warm September night in 1998, the Millfield County Fair was alive with music, laughter, and the glow of carnival lights. But before the night was over, a 17-year-old boy walked away from a Ferris wheel and vanished without a trace. His disappearance would haunt an entire community for more than 2 decades. No witnesses, no suspects, no answers, until a buried bicycle, discovered by accident 26 years later, unlocked the secrets hidden beneath Nebraska soil. September in Millfield, Nebraska was always a special time. The air turned cooler after the long summer and families from across the county gathered for the annual Millfield County Fair. It was the biggest event of the year. Bright lights, carnival music, the smell of popcorn and fried food drifting through the night. Children ran around with cotton candy in their hands. Teenagers laughed on rides and parents stood in groups talking like they did every year. It was a place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. On the evening of September 19, 1998, 17-year-old Marcus Thompson arrived at the fair with his girlfriend and a group of friends. Marcus was well known in town. He was friendly, kind, and had a natural charm that made people like him. He played on the high school football team, did well in his classes, and had recently received a university recruitment letter. Many people believed he had a bright future ahead of him. That night, Marcus and his girlfriend rode the Ferris wheel together, sharing the view of the fairgrounds lit up like a sea of stars. When they got off, Marcus told her he'd be right back. He didn't say where he was going. It seemed like something small, maybe to grab a drink, meet a friend, or use the restroom. She waited, expecting him to return in a few minutes, but Marcus never came back. At first, no one panicked. Teenagers often wandered off at the fair. Maybe he ran into someone he knew, maybe he got distracted. But as the night went on and Marcus didn't return, worry began to set in. His friends started searching the fairgrounds, calling his name, checking the rides, food stalls, and parking lots. His girlfriend's confusion turned into fear. When Marcus's parents arrived and couldn't find him either, they contacted the local sheriff's department. Officers searched the fairgrounds that night. They checked bathrooms, behind trailers, and along nearby roads. Carnival workers were questioned. Announcements were made over the loudspeaker and vehicles were stopped at the exits. But there was no sign of Marcus. It was as if he had simply disappeared into thin air. The news spread quickly through the small town. People who had gone home returned to the fairgrounds to help search. Volunteers formed groups, walking through nearby fields and wooded areas with flashlights. Neighbors stayed up all night, hoping someone would find him. But when morning came, Marcus was still missing. For Diana Thompson, Marcus's mother, that night marked the end of the life she once knew. She had hugged her son goodbye earlier that evening, never imagining it would be the last time. In the weeks that followed, she lived every parent's worst nightmare. Posters with Marcus's picture went up all over town. Police interviewed hundreds of people, including carnival staff and fair visitors. Tips came in but led nowhere. The fair returned every September, but for Diana, it was no longer a place of joy. Each year, she watched other families laugh and make memories while she was stuck in the past. In 2003, 5 years after Marcus disappeared, she stopped going entirely. The sound of carnival music and children's laughter had become too painful, a reminder of the night everything changed. The case grew colder with each passing year. New sheriffs took over, each inheriting a thick file of reports, statements, and photographs, but no real answers. Evidence was moved into storage, gathering dust. Investigators came and went. Technology changed, but Marcus's file sat untouched for long stretches of time. Despite the lack of progress, the community never completely forgot. A reward fund was created to encourage anyone with information to come forward. Over time, donations and interest increased it to $47,000. Diana held on to hope. Even as the years passed and faces in town changed, the reward became her way of keeping Marcus's name alive, a symbol that the search wasn't over. For over 2 decades, every new lead ended in disappointment. Witness statements were re-examined. Carnival workers were tracked down, but nothing broke the case open. The Ferris wheel where Marcus had last been seen was eventually removed, leaving an empty space at the fairgrounds. Yet for those who remembered, that spot always carried a heavy silence. In the hearts of Marcus's family and the Millfield community, September 19, 1998, was frozen in time. It was the night a promising young man vanished from a place that was supposed to be safe. It was the beginning of a mystery that would haunt them for the next 26 years. It was a quiet morning in May 2024, almost 26 years after Marcus Thompson vanished. For most people in Millfield, life had moved on. Children who once searched the fields with flashlights were now adults with families of their own. New houses had been built, roads had been expanded, and the fairgrounds had changed over time. But the mystery of Marcus's disappearance still lived in the background of the town's memory, an unsolved question that never truly went away. That spring, a construction crew was working on expanding a residential neighborhood on the outskirts of Millfield, a few miles from the fairgrounds. It was a routine job, clearing land, digging foundations, and preparing for new homes. No one imagined they were about to uncover the key to a decades-old mystery. Early that morning, one of the excavator operators, a man named Tom Jenkins, was digging a trench for a drainage line. As he lowered the machine's bucket into the ground, it hit something solid with a loud clank. At first, Tom thought it was just an old pipe or a buried fence post, which was common in rural areas. But when he cleared away more dirt, he noticed something strange. A piece of rusted metal with faded red paint was sticking out of the soil. Curious, Tom jumped down from the excavator to take a closer look. The more he brushed away the dirt, the clearer it became. This wasn't just scrap metal, it was part of a bicycle frame. The wheels were bent, the handlebars were twisted, and the entire bike was buried several feet underground. It looked like it had been there for a very long time. Tom called his supervisor over, and soon the local sheriff's office was contacted. At first, officers weren't sure what to make of it. Old bicycles were often discarded or buried accidentally during construction, but something about this discovery felt different. The bike was in a remote part of the construction site, far away from any homes or known dumping spots, and it was buried deep, not just tossed aside. The sheriff's deputies decided to secure the area and carefully excavate the bicycle. As they lifted it out of the ground, they saw that despite the rust and damage, the serial number on the bike's frame was still visible. They took detailed photographs, bagged the bike as evidence, and sent the serial number to be checked in the national database. A few days later, the results came back, and the discovery sent a shockwave through the sheriff's department. The bicycle matched the serial number of Marcus Thompson's bike, which had been reported missing the same night he disappeared in 1998. The bike had been custom painted red with a silver stripe by Marcus and his father, which made it easy to identify. There was no doubt it was his. News of the discovery spread quickly through Millfield. For the first time in decades, there was a real lead in the case. People who had long stopped talking about Marcus found themselves remembering that night all over again. Some felt hope, others felt dread. Diana Thompson, Marcus's mother, received a call from the sheriff in the middle of the afternoon. When she heard the words, "We found his bicycle," she went silent. It was a moment she had imagined many times over the years, but when it actually happened, it hit her like a wave. For Diana, the discovery of the bicycle was bittersweet. On one hand, it was proof that Marcus had been in that area. It was evidence, something real after years of nothing but rumors. But on the other hand, it brought back the pain of that night as if it were yesterday. She stared at the photograph of the rusted bicycle, remembering how Marcus had proudly ridden it through their neighborhood, laughing with the wind in his hair. Now it was a broken relic pulled from the ground. Investigators returned to the construction site and conducted a thorough search of the surrounding area. Cadaver dogs were brought in, and ground-penetrating radar was used to scan beneath the soil. They hoped the bicycle might lead them to Marcus's remains, or more evidence. For weeks, teams combed through the land, digging carefully, marking off grids, but they didn't find a body. The site was empty, except for the bicycle that had been buried all those years. Still, this discovery changed everything. It proved that Marcus had made it at least part of the way to that remote area on the night he disappeared. It gave investigators a new location, a new focus, and perhaps most importantly, it reignited public interest in the case. People who had stayed silent for years began coming forward with old memories and information, hoping that something they remembered could finally help solve the mystery. The bicycle's discovery didn't solve the case overnight, but it cracked open a door that had been closed for far too long. What had once seemed like a mystery lost to time was suddenly alive again. And behind that door, investigators were about to uncover secrets that had been buried just as deeply as Marcus's red bicycle. When the rusted red bicycle was pulled out of the ground, it became more than just an old object. It became a bridge to the past. For over 2 decades, investigators had worked with fading memories and scattered clues, but now they had something real, something physical. And on the frame, just beneath a layer of rust and dirt, the bicycle's serial number was still visible. Detective Laura Simmons, who had recently taken over cold cases in Millfield County, was the one who pushed for a detailed check. She believed that even the smallest trace could hold the key. The serial number, though corroded, was carefully cleaned and documented. Every digit was verified twice to make sure there was no mistake. Once confirmed, it was entered into a national database that records stolen property, missing items, and evidence connected to unsolved cases. It didn't take long for the results to return. The serial number matched exactly with the one listed in the original 1998 missing person report filed by Marcus Thompson's father. He had kept the bicycle's purchase papers all those years. Back then, Marcus and his father had customized the bike together, painting it red with a silver racing stripe and installing a unique set of handle grips. This personalization made the identification clear and beyond doubt. The moment the match came through, the sheriff's department called in all available investigators to review the old case files. Dusty boxes were pulled out of storage. Inside were photographs from 1998, interviews, maps of the fairgrounds, and handwritten notes from detectives who had long since retired. What had once felt like a forgotten case suddenly became active again. The serial number also gave detectives something new to work with: the timeline. According to the original report, Marcus was last seen at the fair around 8:45 p.m. His girlfriend remembered him walking toward the food stalls, saying he'd be back soon. His bicycle was parked near the edge of the fairgrounds, chained to a fence, but when officers searched that night, the bike was already gone. This meant that someone had taken the bicycle not long after Marcus disappeared, or Marcus himself had ridden away. But why would he leave without telling anyone? And if someone else took it, how did it end up buried miles away from the fairgrounds? Detective Simmons and her team began tracing the history of the land where the bicycle was found. In 1998, it had been an undeveloped, wooded area on the edge of town. There were only a few dirt paths and fields. It wasn't a place teenagers usually hung out, and there were no lights or public spots nearby. The land was privately owned at the time, belonging to a man named William Brennan, who had died in 2010. Investigators looked deeper into Brennan's records. He was a quiet man, a retired truck driver, who lived alone on a small property nearby. He didn't have a criminal record, and during the original investigation, no one had reported anything suspicious about him. Back then, police had no reason to search his land in detail, especially without evidence pointing in that direction. But the bicycle's location changed everything. The fact that it was buried there meant someone had intentionally hidden it. It wasn't dumped carelessly. It was buried deep, as if whoever did it wanted it to stay hidden for good. Detectives obtained property maps and old aerial photographs to see what the area looked like in 1998. They discovered that Brennan's property was located along a dirt back road that could be accessed quietly from the fairgrounds without passing through main streets. This raised new questions. Did Marcus leave the fair willingly and ride toward that area? Did someone lure him away? Or did someone else take the bicycle, bring it to that land, and hide it after something went wrong? To find answers, the sheriff's department also contacted the Thompson family again. Marcus's father, now older but still sharp, brought out the original paperwork from the bike shop where he and Marcus had bought the bicycle. Seeing the serial number on the police form match the one on the evidence report brought tears to his eyes. For him, it wasn't just a number, it was a piece of his son's life. The serial number didn't solve the case on its own, but it reopened doors that had been closed for too long. It provided proof of where Marcus, or at least his bicycle, ended up. It gave detectives a direction, something they hadn't had in years. The landowner's background, the route from the fairgrounds, and the deliberate burial all became crucial puzzle pieces. For the first time in decades, the investigation wasn't built on theories alone. It was built on evidence, and evidence, no matter how old, doesn't forget. When investigators traced the buried bicycle back to the land once owned by William Brennan, they expected to find more questions than answers. But buried within that property's history was a name they had overlooked years earlier: Timothy Brennan, William's nephew. He was 19 in 1998, living temporarily with his uncle after dropping out of community college. At the time of Marcus's disappearance, he had been interviewed briefly along with other locals, but nothing suspicious had stood out. He'd moved away shortly after and had never been questioned again. Now, in 2024, Timothy was 45 years old and living 2 states away. Detectives tracked him down and contacted him for a follow-up interview. At first, he seemed calm and cooperative. He said he barely remembered that time in his life. But when detectives mentioned Marcus Thompson's bicycle being found on his uncle's former property, his voice changed. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It was the first crack in a wall that had stood for more than 2 decades. A few weeks later, Timothy agreed to travel back to Nebraska voluntarily to talk. He walked into the sheriff's office wearing plain clothes, his shoulders slightly hunched, looking like a man carrying a heavy weight. Detectives brought him into a quiet interview room. What started as a routine conversation soon turned into something far more serious. Detective Laura Simmons gently laid out the evidence: the recovered bicycle, the matched serial number, the maps of the land, and Timothy's connection to the property. She explained that the discovery had reopened the case and that investigators were retracing every step from that night. She asked him directly, "Timothy, do you know anything about what happened to Marcus Thompson?" For a moment he stared at the table, his hands trembling slightly. He tried to deny involvement, but as the questions grew more detailed, his answers began to fall apart. Investigators presented records showing that Timothy had been working at a food stall near the edge of the fairgrounds that night, something he had never mentioned in his original statement. Witnesses from old reports had described seeing a man who matched his appearance talking with Marcus near the bicycle rack shortly before Marcus vanished. Finally, after hours of questioning, Timothy Brennan broke down. His voice cracked as he admitted that he had indeed interacted with Marcus that night. According to Timothy, he and Marcus got into a heated argument over a personal matter that he refused to explain in detail at first, but later he revealed the truth. Timothy had tried to buy Marcus's bike earlier that summer, but Marcus had refused. Timothy, who struggled with money and resentment, saw Marcus as a golden boy who had everything. Seeing him at the fair that night stirred old bitterness. After their argument, Timothy said Marcus rode off toward the back road near his uncle's property to cool off. Timothy followed him on foot, still angry. The confrontation continued in the dark, away from the fair. Timothy claimed that things got physical, a push, a struggle, and then Marcus fell and hit his head on a rock. Timothy insisted it wasn't planned. He described the moment as panic. He didn't know what to do, so instead of calling for help, he dragged Marcus's bicycle onto his uncle's land and buried it, terrified that he'd be blamed for what happened. When detectives pressed him about Marcus's body, Timothy hesitated. He eventually admitted that after realizing Marcus wasn't moving, he panicked even more. He claimed he left the scene, convinced Marcus would either wake up or someone else would find him. But when he returned hours later, Marcus was gone. Timothy said he didn't know what happened after that night. Whether this was true or not, detectives noted that his story left many gaps. His confession was both shocking and incomplete. It didn't answer every question, but it confirmed what investigators suspected: Timothy Brennan had been directly involved in the events of that night. The buried bicycle was not a random mystery. It was his doing. Timothy Brennan was arrested and charged with manslaughter and obstruction of justice, as well as additional charges related to concealing evidence. The confession reopened not only the investigation, but also old wounds in the community. People who had known Timothy were stunned. For years he had lived quietly, blending into normal life, carrying a secret that had the power to devastate an entire town. For Diana Thompson, hearing about the confession was a mix of pain, anger, and strange relief. For so long she had imagined every possibility of what happened to her son. Now she had at least part of the truth, but it came decades too late. The boy who had once ridden off into the night was gone, and the man who could have spoken up had chosen silence all those years. The confession didn't solve everything, but it pulled Marcus's story out of the shadows and into the light. The truth had been buried, just like the bicycle. But unlike the bike, Timothy Brennan's guilt couldn't stay underground forever. After Timothy Brennan's partial confession, investigators knew they were closer to the truth than ever before, but one question remained unanswered. Where was Marcus? Brennan's story described a fight and panic, but he claimed Marcus's body was gone by the time he returned. Some detectives believed he was still hiding something, while others thought a third person might have been involved. Either way, the discovery of the buried bicycle proved Marcus had made it to the outskirts of town near Brennan's uncle's land. The next step was to search every inch of that property and the surrounding fields. Detectives obtained old maps and aerial photographs of the property from 1998. Back then, the land was mostly overgrown, with a few dirt paths and a large, unused grain silo standing at the far edge of the property. It was rusted, weather-beaten, and partially filled with soil and farm debris. For years, no one had touched it. It was considered just another abandoned farm structure. But something about that silo caught Detective Laura Simmons' attention. She noticed that in photos from the early 2000s, the silo appeared sealed at the bottom, as if someone had welded the entry door shut. There was no record of why or when that happened. This detail raised suspicion. If someone wanted to hide something permanently, a sealed grain silo in a remote area would be the perfect place. In early August 2024, the Sheriff's Department brought in a forensic excavation team and structural engineers. They carefully cut open the lower access door, which had been welded shut decades earlier. As the heavy metal door finally gave way, a wave of stale, earthy air rushed out. What lay inside was a mixture of hardened dirt, rusted farm tools, and old debris. It looked like no one had stepped inside for years. The excavation began slowly and carefully. Layers of dirt and debris were removed one at a time. After a few days, a cadaver dog signaled near the back corner of the silo's floor. Investigators marked the area and continued digging. A few feet below the surface, they uncovered a piece of fabric, faded and torn but still recognizable. It appeared to be part of a shirt. Further down, fragments of bone began to appear. The excavation turned into a delicate recovery operation. Forensic anthropologists were called in to properly collect and document everything found inside. Over the next several days, they unearthed partial skeletal remains, along with personal items, a broken wristwatch, a belt buckle, and a pair of worn sneakers. One of the shoes still had faint traces of red mud, matching the soil from the area where Marcus had last been seen. When investigators saw the belt buckle, one of the older deputies recognized it immediately. It had Marcus's initials, Montana, engraved on the back. His father had given it to him on his 17th birthday. That was the moment everyone realized they had likely found Marcus Thompson. The remains were sent to a forensic lab for formal identification. Even though decades had passed, modern DNA technology had advanced tremendously. Scientists extracted DNA from the bone samples and compared it with a DNA swab from Marcus's mother, Diana. After weeks of waiting, the results came back. The remains belonged to Marcus Thompson. The news spread through Millfield like a storm. After 26 years, Marcus had finally been found. For the Thompson family, the moment was both heartbreaking and strangely peaceful. Diana wept when she received the call, holding the phone tightly as if afraid to let go. For years, she had lived with uncertainty, never knowing if her son was alive somewhere, suffering, or gone. Now she finally had an answer, though it came decades too late. The discovery of Marcus's remains inside the silo also raised new questions. If Timothy Brennan claimed he left Marcus at the scene, then who put his body inside and sealed the door? The heavy welding and the effort to conceal the remains suggested planning, something Timothy alone might not have done. Investigators began looking at others who had access to the property at the time, including Brennan's uncle and his associates. But beyond the legal implications, the excavation was deeply emotional for the entire town. People who had grown up hearing Marcus's story visited the site to lay flowers and ribbons on the fence. News crews reported from the area, and a memorial service was planned near the old fairgrounds, the place where Marcus was last seen alive. For the first time since 1998, Marcus Thompson was no longer a missing person. He was a victim whose story was finally coming to light. His discovery inside that forgotten silo marked the beginning of closure, not just for his family, but for an entire community that had lived under the shadow of his disappearance for more than 2 decades. The discovery of Marcus Thompson's remains brought an end to a mystery that had haunted Millfield for more than 2 decades. But even with the truth finally uncovered, the emotions that followed were complex and deeply personal. For Marcus's family, friends, and the community, closure did not arrive with a single phone call or a headline. It came slowly, mixed with both relief and heartbreak. After the identification was confirmed, the Thompson family decided to hold a public memorial service at the Methodist Church in Millfield. This was the same church where candlelight vigils had been held every year since Marcus disappeared. On a crisp October morning, people from across town gathered to honor his memory. Many who attended had been children or teenagers in 1998. Now they returned as adults, some with their own children, standing quietly as church bells rang to mark the beginning of the service. Marcus's aunt, Margaret Walsh, stood at the front of the church to speak. Her voice trembled as she shared memories of Marcus, his kindness, his big smile, his excitement about going to college. She talked about the years of waiting, the endless questions, and the pain of not knowing. For 26 years, Marcus lived in our hearts but not in our world, she said softly. Today, we finally bring him home. The service was filled with tears, but also a sense of community that had never disappeared even as the case grew cold. Old classmates shared stories. Teachers remembered his dreams, The sheriff's department publicly apologized for the investigative mistakes that had allowed Timothy Brennan and Dale Hoffman to avoid scrutiny for so long. For many, it was a bittersweet moment. The truth had arrived, but it came too late for Marcus to live the future he deserved. Timothy Brennan faced legal consequences for his role in the cover-up. He was charged with accessory to manslaughter and failure to report a death. Although his confession had played a crucial role in solving the case, it didn't erase what had happened. Brennan expressed deep remorse in court, saying he had lived with the weight of that night every single day. The judge sentenced him to prison, acknowledging both the seriousness of his actions and his cooperation decades later. Dale Hoffman, the man most responsible for Marcus's death, had died years earlier, taking many details with him. For Sheriff Kyle Morrison, the case changed everything. He had grown up in Millfield, hearing stories about Marcus. Solving this cold case became both a professional mission and a personal responsibility. He often said that discovering the buried bicycle was not just an investigative break, it was a reminder that the past is never as far away as we think. After the case closed, Morrison implemented new policies to make sure that missing persons investigations in Millfield would never again be neglected or forgotten. The resolution of Marcus's case also inspired wider change. Investigators from other states contacted Nebraska authorities to check whether Hoffman or Brennan might have been involved in other unsolved disappearances along the carnival circuit. The story gained national attention, appearing in newspapers, documentaries, and podcasts. People were moved by how a simple accident at a construction site had finally uncovered the truth after 26 years. For Marcus's loved ones, the pain never fully disappeared, but it transformed. His grave became a place of quiet reflection rather than unanswered questions. His former girlfriend, Sarah Gonzalez, returned to Millfield for the memorial with her children. She told them stories about Marcus, the boy who made her laugh, who talked about dreams of becoming a teacher, who disappeared on a night filled with carnival lights. At the gravesite, she whispered goodbye, something she had never been able to do before. The legacy of Marcus Thompson's case extended far beyond Millfield. It reminded people that cold cases are not just files in a cabinet. They are real lives, real families, real grief. It showed how a single overlooked clue can change everything, even decades later. And it highlighted how communities, no matter how small, can come together to seek truth and justice, no matter how long it takes. In the end, Marcus's story was not just about tragedy. It was about endurance, hope, and the power of time to uncover what people once tried to hide. His disappearance had shaken Millfield, but his discovery united it. Though he would forever remain 17 in the memories of those who loved him, his legacy ensured that no one in Millfield would ever forget him or ignore the signs of someone else who might need help. The case officially closed with a sense of resolution, but Marcus Thompson's story lived on, and the policies changed, the hearts touched, and the lessons learned. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive quickly. Sometimes it waits beneath the surface until the right moment brings it to light. Marcus Thompson's story is a reminder that time may pass, but the truth has a way of surfacing. Every clue matters. Every voice counts, and no case is ever truly forgotten. If this case moved you, consider sharing this story to keep his memory alive and raise awareness about other unsolved disappearances. If you want to follow more real-life investigations, cold cases, and breakthroughs just like this one, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps us continue telling the stories that deserve to be heard. And if you know of a case that needs more attention, share it in the comments below. Together we can keep these stories from fading away.